Hi, this is Simon Obstill and welcome to another tutorial for Apple Motion. And today we're going to be taking a look at creating this glass effect. Now, even if you don't want to create this particular scene, there are lots of interesting techniques involved in this process that I'm sure you'll be able to use in other contexts. So let's make a start on this. So first of all, let's look at creating our glass shards, which we're going to do in a separate project. So let's just look at the project settings for this. I've got a width of 410 and a height of 430. I've got 24 frames a second and a duration of 1 second. So we've got 24 frames in all. So then I'm going to select my Bezier tool and I'm going to draw an isosceles triangle like so. So top center, bottom left, bottom right. Let's center it back up again. I'm going to move it down -210 on Y, and then we're going to come to the shape, geometry, and we'll set this up. So 0, 420, 200, 0, -200, 0. So now we've got a very neat triangle that's sitting just within the borders of the frame. Let's come over to the style. The fill color I want to set to 100% red. So there we go. And then I want to turn on the outline and I want to set this to 100% green. And then I want an outline width of 10. So you'll see now why I came in a little bit from the edges of the frame. So next, let's make a new group and let's import the asset called Dirty Glass. I'm going to set its scale to 50%. Then I'm going to add an image mask to this group. So right-click, add image mask, and I'm going to select the Bezier shape as the source, and I'm going to switch to red. And as you can see, that gives us the inside without the outline. Now I can duplicate that group, right-click, duplicate, come to the image mask and select green. And now we've got the outline in that new group. So then I'm going to come down to the dirty glass element here, the first one. I'm going to come to the position and I'm going to add parameter behavior, randomize. The apply to wants to be transform position X and Y. I'm going to select an amount of 175 and the apply mode is going to be add and subtract. And now you'll see that on every frame, we've got a different sample of our glass. And I can now copy that onto the edge. So I'll hold down the Alt or Option key and drag that randomize onto the Dirty Glass copy there. And what we need to do here is we need to hit the random seed button to make sure that that is a different result. So for each of those, we have now got a different result for the edge and for the fill. What I'm also going to do is to each of these, I'm going to add filters, distortion, refraction. And I'm going to have a refraction amount of 175. And I'm going to copy that by Alt dragging it onto the other group. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this as a movie. So I'm going to come to the Share menu, Export Movie. I'm going to make sure that I've selected ProRes 4x4 and I'm going to save it to my Assets folder and I'm going to call it Shards Inner. That's saved very, very quickly. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off these two groups and I want to also save this mask here, the Bezier mask, the red-green Bezier mask. So I'll come to Share, Save Current Frame. I'm going to select PNG, so color plus alpha, and I'm going to save this as shard mask. That's very quickly saved. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn back on these two groups here, turn off the mask itself. I'm going to come back into the mask and come to its geometry. So we're going to come to the first frame of the sequence. We're going to hit a keyframe. We're going to come to the last frame. We'll set the 0.1x to -200 and the 0.2y to +420. And now what we're going to get is a lot of different shaped triangles as we go through the sequence. So I'm going to, again, export this as a movie. Again, make sure we've selected 444. And what we're going to do this time is call it shards outer and hit save. So now let's start a new project. We'll have 1920 1080, 24 frames a second. I think I'm going to go for 8 seconds here. So first of all, I want to build up my lens element. And to do that, I'm going to select the circle tool, and I'm roughly going to draw a circle like that. And then I'm going to center it up. So over in the geometry, I want to set the size as 390. Over in the style, I want to turn off fill, turn on outline. I want an outline width of 95. And I'm going to change this color to something like that. Then I'm going to duplicate that circle, right-click duplicate. Over in the geometry, we'll set the radius to 360. Over in the style, let's set the width to 20. And let's just change the color to that. Then let's again duplicate that, right-click duplicate. Over in the geometry, let's set the radius to 340. And back over in the style, let's set the width to 10. And let's just very slightly darken down this color, like so. Then let's duplicate that circle again. Let's turn off outline, turn on fill. For the fill, let's select this color. Let's set the feather to -235. Let's duplicate that circle, set its blend mode to add, and let's just reduce its size a little bit. So come to the radius and set that to 150. So we've got a kind of bright spot in the middle. So that's our basic lens effect. So I've brought in some text, obviously just used the text tool to do this. So I've also made it almost black. And what I also did, and I'm not going to show you this here, is to add a sequence text behavior to get the letters to jumble up a bit like that. And this is something I've covered in another tutorial, and I'll give you the link to that in the description. So next I'm going to make a new group, and I want to put it inside this existing one. And into it, I'm going to import the assets that we've made. So that's the mask and those 2 shards movies. Bring them into there, into that group. We can turn that group off. So I'm going to take the shards mask and I'm going to make a replicator out of it. So object replicate. Actually, let's turn this group back on again so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to turn off the other elements so as not to confuse. So here's our replicator. I'm going to select circle and outline. I'm going to set the radius to 222. I want 7 points. I want to come down and I want to turn on align angle. I want a little bit of angle randomness, so I'm going to go for 5. So what I'm going to do here with this replicator is I'm going to come back to the shards mask, and I'm going to add, first of all, a Gaussian blur. Then I'm going to add a color channel mixer, and I'm also going to add a crystallize. For the Gaussian blur, I'm going to set the amount to 32. In the channel mixer, I'm going to turn on the monochrome switch, which is at the bottom there, and you can see that changes the... Actually, let me just set the crystallize up first of all. I just want a size of 3 and a speed of 0. That's really just to break up the edge. So what I want to do is I want to leverage the colors that I've got in that, but in a kind of different ratio. So I'm going to set the red to 0.25 and the red-green to 1. And you can see now I've got grey for where the red was and something closer to white for where the green was. In fact, if we wanted to even more out of the green, we could turn that up to 2. Let's stick with 1 for the time being. We might want to come back and revisit that. Then I want to come back to my replicator and I want to select Behaviors, Replicator, Sequence Replicator. We're going to add opacity. We're going to set that opacity value to 50%. And we're going to set the sequencing to through and the spread to 2. And what that's going to do is it's going to cycle the opacity on those elements. What we also need to do there is come back to the replicator itself, and this button called shuffle order we need to turn on, so that instead of just going round clockwise, it kind of does it at random. So this enclosing group here with the replicator inside it, I've called displace, and I also want to turn on its fixed resolution. So then I'm going to come to the master group and also turn on its fixed resolution. And to it, I'm going to add filters distortion bump map. Now I'm going to turn off that displace because we don't need to see it in fact, but I'm going to use it as the source for the bump map. And you can immediately see how that's now broken up the text. And because we've got that sequence replicator, it's sliding the different panes of glass around at different times. And for a bit of extra interest, I'm also going to add to this group filters, distortion, refraction. And again, I'm going to use that replicator as the source. We're going to increase the softness to around 0.65 and the refraction all the way up to 200. And you can see that's just broken things up a little bit more, giving us a slightly more glass-like effect. So then I'm going to come down to just below the text there, so where I've got all my circle elements, and I'm going to make a new group, and I'm going to put all those circle elements into that new group. And then I'm going to right-click, make clone layer, and I'm going to set the blend mode of this new layer to add. And then I'm going to right-click, add image mask, and we're going to use the replicator as the source. And we're going to select luminance. So with the clone selected, I'm going to come over to its scale and set that to 104%. And I'm going to come to the image mask and I'm going to select color levels. And I'm going to bring in both the black and the white like so. So the effect of that clone is that it's doing a little bit of selective brightening up based on the replicator itself. So it will change depending on the animation of the replicator. And it's also giving us a little bit of extra kind of glassiness. So the next thing I want to do is I want to create the glass texture over the top. And that's what we're going to do with the shards inner element that's in there. So let's drag that out to a new group and we can turn it on. And what we're going to do with this again is to make a replicator. So object replicate. Again, we're going to select circle. Again, we're going to select outline. Again, we're going to align angle. Again, we want 7 points and we want a little bit of angle randomness. I'm going to go with more angle randomness this time, so 10. I'm going to set the radius to 230. And I also want to come down and turn off play frames because we want it to select the individual frames from our sequence, but not play them. And then we just need to hit the random start frames button. So each of those is now a different element picked from that range. So I'm going to set the opacity of this layer to 80%. So it's sort of see-through to the background like that. And I also want to add a behaviors replicator, sequence replicator to it. The parameter we want to affect is opacity. We'll set the opacity value to 75%. So what that will do is cycle through the opacity of each different pane of glass. So then I want some rotation on this overlay element. So it rotates a bit like that. So I'm going to add parameter behavior rate. I'm going to set that rate value to -2. Now I need everything else to follow along. So I'm going to take this group here and I'm going to link, add parameter behavior, link its rotation to that replicator. Now obviously we don't want our text to be rotating. So I'm going to take my text, add parameter behavior link, and again I'm going to link it to the replicator and I'm going to set a scale of -1, and that'll just counteract the rotation and keep the text static as everything else moves. So then I want to add some glow beneath the glass overlay. So I'm going to take this group that I've renamed base. This is the base layer underneath that glass, and I'm going to right-click Make Clone Layer. And again, we need to link that rotation to the replicator. So let's do that. Add parameter behavior link and select the replicator. Do not be tempted to copy links ever. Motion really doesn't like that. You might think you've got away with it, but you'll be fooled. So never do that. Okay, so let's set the blend mode of this to add, and then let's stack it up with a load of filters. So first of all, I'm going to select color levels. Then I'm going to select blur prism. Then I'm going to select color hue saturation. And then I'm going to select blur Gaussian blur. So first of all, let's use the levels to get a bit more punch out of this. So we're going to bring in both the black and the white. And immediately the effect of that is to kind of increase the saturation and the contrast. Let's increase that prism amount to 12, because it gives us this nice sort of chromatic aberration effect. I'm just going to rotate it, I think, a little bit. So I'm going to go for 150. I kind of prefer that color to come down the bottom there. And then I'm going to just add more saturation. So I'm going to increase the saturation to 1. So we're really pushing that saturation. Then that Gaussian blur, I'm going to set to 64 and its mix value down to 75. And then I'm going to right click duplicate. This new copy, I'm going to set its amount to 256 and its mix value down to 50. Then I'm going to duplicate it again, right click duplicate, set this value up to 512 and set the mix value down to 15. So I've called this glass overlay group, glass overlay, and we've now got a group that's got the glow element in it and the base, and I'm going to put those two into a new group. Drag them in there like that, and let's call that main. Then I want to come back into the displace group where we left it, the shards outer element. I'm going to drag that out into a new group at the top here. And again, we're going to make a replicator from this. So object replicate. Again, we're going to set it to circle and outline. Now, what we want to do with these is to have shards going around the outside of everything. So I'm going to turn on the line angle, and I'm going to set the angle itself to 180. Now, as before, we don't want play frames, so let's turn that off, and again, let's turn on random start frames, so we get a random assortment of images from that sequence. Let's increase the radius to something like 500. Let's increase the number of points to something like 19. Let's have some scale randomness, so scale randomness of 50. And let's also have some angle randomness. Let's go for 45 there. I'm going to turn on additive blend here. And we also need to reduce the opacity of this layer to something like 50%. And I'm also going to add another sequence replicator to this. Replicator, sequence replicator. We're going to add two parameters. One is rotation, the other of which is opacity. The rotation is going to be 15. The opacity is going to be 50. The sequencing is going to be through, and the spread is going to be 10. And that's going to just give us a little bit of cycling, rotation, and opacity on those different elements. What we need to remember to do is to turn on shuffle order. And I think I probably didn't do that in this glass overlay replicator. No, I didn't. So we need to turn that on there as well. Again, so they just don't go in a kind of clockwise direction. So at this point, there's a couple of extra elements I want to add, but I think I'm going to first of all just add a light. So we've got those three groups. We've got the main, the glass overlay, and the outer A, as I've called it. And we're going to set all of those to 3D. And now we can add a light. Let's give it some color. And let's adjust its intensity up to 200%. And let's come over and adjust its position. We'll have negative 220 on X, 300 on Y. And then we're going to duplicate that light, right-click duplicate. This one I want to be slightly less yellow, so let's reduce its saturation a bit like that. And let's come over and adjust its position. I want 320 on X and negative 300 on Y. Now, what we don't want to do is to have our main group be illuminated by the lights. So I'm going to come down to its lighting and turn that off. And you can see that now shines through the rest of the glass elements and looks much more as though it's a light source. So from this point on, it's really a question of what you choose to do in terms of animation and so on. So I'm really going to do some very, very basic things. One of which is I'm going to actually rotate this outer ring. So let's just add a rate behavior to the group there. And let's set that to -3. In fact, let's go for +3. So it's actually going in the opposite direction to the main rotation. So that's probably quite nice. Then let's add a camera, because I want to show you what one can do in terms of offsetting some of these layers in Z space. So let's first of all start with the main group, and let's move it back by 800 pixels on Z, and then just scale it up again to compensate. So let's go for, where are we, 140 or something like that. And let's take the glass overlay and let's move it back -400 on Z. And again, let's just scale it up just till we're back in sort of sync, as it were, roughly speaking. It doesn't have to be too precise. And then if we look at our camera, we could look at a very simple animation of the rotation. So let's come to the end here, set a keyframe for the X and Y rotation. And then let's begin with a Y rotation of 30 and an X rotation of 15. And then gradually we'll see the sort of layers coming to sync with each other. And that sort of Z offset makes it quite a nice effect. You could do that much more dynamically and have that sort of zip into place. Let's quickly show you that. So if we come to the timeline editor and we grab that keyframe and we move it forward to say 8 frames, and let's have a look how that looks. We get that kind of zip in effect, which is, again, maybe it's what you want. We could also animate the replicator here of the outer layer. So we could animate its radius so it looks like it's sort of breaking out like that. Any number of options, really, and I won't really go into those here. So one final little tweak I'd like to do is to take that main group there and add filters unsharp mask. And what that does is it just kind of pulls out some of those colors as well as sharpening it up. Just makes it a little bit more rich, I think. As I say, there's lots more you could do. You could add more outer layers and again offset them in Z space. So really, I'll leave it up to you now to decide how you want to style it. So I hope that's been a useful tutorial. Thanks very much indeed for watching. And as always, a very big thank you to my Patreon patrons.